and welcome to Reality Plus Us. I'm Helen Papagiannis.
And I'm Avi Barzev. And on today's episode, we're joined by Vicki Dobbs Beck, who is a veteran entertainment executive with more than 30 years of experience driving innovation and digital transformation in supportive storytelling. In 2015, she co-founded Lucasfilm's award-winning immersive storytelling studio, ILM X Lab, now ILM Immersive, and has since been at the helm. Under Vicki's leadership, ILM Immersive has produced a robust portfolio of groundbreaking experiences, including Carne Arena, directed by Alejandro Inarritu, an award-winning special Oscar by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. Vader Immortal, a Star Wars VR series, winner of PGA Innovation Award in 2020, and most recently the Emmy Award-winning What If, an immersive story with Marvel Studios, the first ever interactive Disney Plus original story for Apple Vision Pro. Welcome, Vicki.
Thank you. It's so great to be here. Really excited to have this conversation.
Oh, good. We're happy to have you here. Thanks. We thought maybe we would start just by going over some of the more recent experiences that you made with your group, and we have a couple of questions around it. And for me especially, that I'm coming at this from the perspective of a prototyper. I love experiments like this. I love when you get to have an awesome team come together and build something and then try something new and then see what everybody thinks about it. I've only ever got to do that in secret with, designers and executives, but you get to do it out in public, which of course, raises the bar for the visual fidelity and the acting and everything else has to be studio quality, which it is. But I wanted to go through and ask for each of these, the most four recent things that we know about, what was the question that you were trying to answer? Like, there must have been a reason to do the experience. So you had that in mind. Nobody wants to spend money on a random thing. So you had a reason to think about this. And then also for each one of these, what did you learn? Like, what was the takeaway, which might be different from why you set out to do it. You might have learned something new. So just wanted to start with going all the way back to 2017 in Star Wars Secrets of the Empire. So what was the motivation and what, did you learn maybe that might not have been obvious before you started?
Well, Secrets of the Empire was actually a little opportunistic in a very positive way, because we were actually in development on Vader Immortal, which was going to be a launch title for the Quest. And this opportunity came along to collaborate with The Void and create a location-based experience. So we didn't have our partnership with Oculus in place at that time. And so what we ended up doing is sort of pivoting the team toward Secrets of the Empire. But we thought this is an amazing opportunity to take a holistic approach to immersive storytelling. So we knew the story that we were going to tell in Vader Immortal, which was really about, Vader and his castle and, what it was that he was searching for and why. So we said, let's make the Secrets of the Empire the prequel. And this will take place also on Mustafar, but in an outpost. And you're going to be asked to figure out what is it that Vader is trying to find and why. So that was wonderful because we got to experiment with, what I would call transmedia, right? We were doing a location-based experience with multiple people. And then we were able to transition that to a home-based experience that was quite a bit longer, 3 episodes. So with location-based experiences, what you can do is, deliver incredible scope and scale. You control the environment, and you can introduce 4D effects. So, we had what you smell, kind of imagining what it would be like to smell, the hot surface of Mustafar. And we also gave heat. So you were feeling the heat, and you were doing it with 3 other people. That was the amazing thing. So one of the things that I learned is that, and this has actually become important for everything that we've done subsequently, is even though, Star Wars is this amazing place and Vader is obviously an incredibly iconic character, what people talked about when they left that experience is what they did together. Mm. You remember when we shot the stormtroopers, and you see when Vader came toward us, and there was just this excitement about this shared experience in another world. So the other thing we learned, which is also kind of interesting, is how to create immersive experiences, and how is it different than creating for linear content, so for films and streaming. Because the temptation, having come from a film background, is to start with a script. And what we realized, and we actually kind of got forced into it because we had a very tight schedule, is that it's far better to sort of understand what your high concept is, what the beats of the story are, but then immediately go into say, what is the interactivity that is meaningful and supports that story? And so you're kind of moving back and forth between story and interactivity very, very early in the process. We also taped out the floor so that we could sort of simulate, so to speak, what the literal physical path would be through the experience, what you would experience, and when. So it was really a lesson in recognizing that this is a highly collaborative, highly iterative art form. And we can talk about that also in What If, because I think we had something like 47 versions of the script when all was said and done. But it had to go through that process of learning what was fun, what was compelling, what made for good story, and making sure that you always felt like you had a meaningful role, because that's obviously the kind of key to immersive entertainment is that you matter.
Yeah.
It makes me think of something that you've talked about in the past, Vicki, and story living, right? Where we're transitioning then from this being a passive observer to being somebody who is the main character, or somebody who is really making meaningful choices in order to advance the narrative. So maybe now's a good time for you to talk a little bit about that and what you mean by story living.
Oh, sure. So you're right. That's an evolution. When we started, we said, okay, we're all about step inside our stories in ways never before possible. And that still is a very important idea. But we realized that we could really transition from storytelling, which, as you noted, is essentially one-way communication, to what I think is a much bigger idea of story living, where you're in a world, you make meaningful choices, you're driving the narrative forward. And the way we think about it is that it sort of starts with a holistic view of the story world, and the experience that you want to create. Because, and I'll go back to this in a minute, because I also use this mosaic metaphor. But so you got a holistic creative vision. Then you need a rich and detailed world so that people have that sense of discovery and exploration. It's intriguing. It pulls you in. Then compelling characters. The characters you have to feel like you could have a relationship with those characters in order for it to really be satisfying. Once you have, the world, the compelling characters, then sort of countless stories can unfold. And those stories can be any number of, forms of storytelling. So we have tended to be in very curated storytelling, where we have a master storyteller who is defining what the experience is. And it is, although you have a meaningful role within it, it still has an arc. Then there's sort of branching stories, and that can mean a number of different things. But What If actually is the first experience we did where there was actually a branch that defined what the conclusion of the experience was. And somebody said something once that was funny, which is they said, the reason most stories aren't branching is because there's a good ending and then there's the other endings. and so the key really is making sure that both endings feel satisfying and like a logical progression based on what you had done. And then there's emergent storytelling. And this is really where this too can mean many things, but it's where people come together in a world filled with characters, and together you're creating story. That's a future that I'm really excited about. I don't exactly know how that is going to unfold. The other piece of it is I like the idea where you go into a world and you do something in that world that changes the world forever. So the next person who comes into the world now experiences that in this changed form. So there's lots of ways this could go. But part of that story living is also I sometimes talk about it like a mosaic, where each tile each tile represents an experience, and it has to be designed, to take advantage of whatever the unique strengths of the device or platform are, and it should be satisfying and compelling on its own. But if it's been designed within a larger picture, like a mosaic, and you pull back, then you see, you reveal a much richer and more complex design. And so if you are experiencing more than one tile, if you will, or more than one experience, it feels like it's a part of something bigger. And so the whole is truly greater than the sum of the parts.
Zooming in on one aspect of that and one talk, because there's so much to talk about in that whole space. I mean, it is, essentially the topic is the future of storytelling and entertainment, how we are going to experience it. But one of the other experiments that you did in 2019, you mentioned Vader Immortal. The other one, though, was maybe not as widely covered, was Project Porg, though, and that seems like a really focused experiment on how we bond with characters and how we can interact with a very dynamic character. Not a lot of story, but a lot of interaction, right, between you and a character. So what did you learn from that one?
That is actually one of my favorite projects that we worked on. And I learned something very surprising, to be honest. Yes, we set out to sort of see what is it like to have characters living in your world, and we wanted to see because obviously it becomes your relationship with that character that is the kind of foundational story, and so we designed the experience in 10-minute segments. There were 7 10-minute segments. This was definitely branded as an ILM XLab experiment. And we wanted to sort of see if you would be engaged over time and encouraged to come back on a daily basis. So in the case of Project Porgs, you're right, it was light story. There was kind of a light story wrapper where C-3PO as a hologram appears and, basically says there's a Porg or two on the loose, and, please look out for them. And if you see them, please take care of them. And of course, the minute he disappears, a Porg pops up, and naturally there's a second one. And so you basically, play with them, feed them. And once they feel comfortable with you, then eventually they build a nest and they lay an egg, and there's a baby Porg, and the Porg becomes an adolescent. So this happened over about 70 minutes of content. And right as we were getting to the point where we were going to release the experiment, which was at LeapCon, which was a conference, I had to review the experience, and so I had to do all 7 in sequence. And so I had the Magic Leap glasses on, and I was interacting with these Porgs. And when I had finished them all, I took the glasses off, and I felt this incredible sense of loss. It was like these pets who I had become very close to had just disappeared. And I was very used to that in VR, where you would take the headset off, and it can be very disorienting when you were on Mustafar and now you're back in your living room. But I actually hadn't anticipated that in mixed reality or augmented reality, because although the use of all the words is changing, but I hadn't expected, because the world around me didn't change, just the presence of the Porgs did. Right. So that was a big learning, and I also genuinely believe that we began to scratch the surface of having experiences where you do have characters consistently in your world, and that they are evolving as your relationship is evolving. I think that's really both fascinating and attractive, and I can't wait to do another project like that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because they live in your world, right? Then when they're gone, you feel that sense of loss as if you might feel for a pet or even more. And that actually the whole line of questioning about responsibility at that point. Like the companies, a small company might try that and then maybe they shut down, and all their fans might actually want to pick up that IP and keep it going because it was so important to them. It's happened in a couple of cases historically where people have been so attached to the content that they wanted to take it over and make it live forever if they could. Very interesting. So that's a great takeaway. Helen, did you
Yeah,
want
I just want to jump in there. So I love that story, Vicki. And it also makes me think about how, and I believe you touched on this before, actually, I think in your AWE talk, it makes me think about how we're not just designing these AR or mixed reality experiences that unfold in your space, we're designing memories, because then you're remembering your interaction with that character as though it was real in your space. And I remember in your AWE talk, you were referencing thinking about the future of storytelling and having a character that I think you referenced BB-8, and that BB-8 would always hide in the closet. And then this girl would grow up and she would remember BB-8 as though he was really hiding in the closet. So yeah, I wanted to maybe unpack that a little bit about designing memories and what's happening and how that's different from VR. Because like you, when I take off Vision Pro, I am stunned that all of those things that I just experienced are not in my living room anymore, right? Because the fidelity and just, I remember as though it was there. So yeah, I wanted to kind of get your take on memory and designing these types of character moments.
No, that's a great point. And I really believe that is the power of immersive experiences and immersive entertainment is that it imprints on your memory. The combination imprints on your memory, meaning the combination of the real world and what was in the digital world, so to speak, or the virtual world. So much so that there's this sort of visceral response. And our very first project was actually not a Star Wars project. It was with Alejandro Inarritu. It was called Carne y Arena. It was a really powerful 6.5 minute VR experience where you are in a scene where there are immigrants crossing the border from Mexico into the United States, and they get caught. And you are there, and it's not, you aren't doing anything other than being present in that scene. But it was so impactful for people. First of all, I still to this day, I'm describing it now. That was like 2017. I can still feel what I felt like when I was in that headset. Mm-hmm. And we had set up some, we basically rented the museum in the evening so we could put people through it, because it was one of those experiences that was difficult to get into, and it was like one person at a time for 15 minutes, so it didn't have huge throughput. And I hadn't actually done it in the museum setting, so I hadn't done the sort of pre-show and post-show, if you will, nor had I done it. I had done the experience on the stage, in our offices, but not with the sort of full, with the sand on the ground and the cold and so forth. So when people came out, most people couldn't talk. Some people were crying. And I just was like, I was a little blown away because I hadn't actually done it that. And then when I did it for the first time in that full setting, I totally understood. It was so memorable, so impactful and powerful that it was literally beyond words. Mm. And I have experienced that, sometimes not quite so, that's a heavy one. But, it's even some really fun times in, Vader Immortal or Secrets of the Empire or What If, etc., where I will, whenever I think about having done that, I will think about the combination of myself the world that I was in and the characters I was interacting with, and they become a part of my sort of human experience.
Yeah, that's a really important. I think it reminds me of there's a few people I interviewed who'd worked on experiences like a VR experience for the Holocaust Museum. Their takeaway was you don't want to virtually experience what it's like in a concentration camp. There's such a thing as PTSD that can happen from virtual experiences.
Yeah.
If you go too far and overwhelm people, it can create a backlash. And another was somebody was working on DEI training. And by putting people into tense situations, you could actually create the opposite effect of what you were trying to do. You could get people to be averse to talking to people of different races because it was so difficult to do. So there's a strong responsibility among the experienced crafters to be impactful, but not so impactful that you can create damage and harm people.
It's true.
That's, I think, really, really good learning. That it brings me to a question. You were talking about these different kinds of impacts and taking advantage of the real world. I don't even know what the right words are anymore between real and virtual. That things that are virtual can be real, especially in memory. They can feel as real as real. So I'm just sort of left with maybe saying the physical and the virtual world. But even then, for something like The Void, there's an overlap between the physical and the virtual, because you're using the physical to simulate things like touch and heat in the virtual. So, but I would go for now at least with physical virtual as the distinguisher, because in some sense it's all real to us.
Right.
So now we jump ahead to What If, an immersive story, and it's a mixed reality experience. It's done on the Apple Vision Pro, so it can take advantage of your physical environment as much as the designers want it to. But for the story purposes, a lot of it takes place elsewhere. It takes place in fractured parallel universes that we can jump around. So maybe talk about what did you learn now, being able to have. Comparing the Magic Leap 1 now to the Vision Pro, you have much wider field of view. You have full control over the transparency. Nothing feels ghostly anymore. It's really solid. And leaving aside any other criticisms people might have about the Apple Vision Pro, it's a really powerful experience. But you can leverage the real world as much as you need to, and you at least get to see your hands. So you're there as yourself the whole time. You can see your body. But you're also in another world at the same time. So what new things did you learn there about this medium of we'll call it spatial computing for Apple's sake?
Yeah. Well, I think the thing we were most excited about doing with What If was taking advantage of both the mixed reality, so in our world, and a fully virtual world, because we had the whole spectrum available to us. And then because Marvel was sort of the perfect IP, as was specifically What If, because Marvel actually does take place, some of it takes place in our world and some of it takes place on other worlds, whereas Star Wars is in a galaxy far, far away. So this was a great IP. And then, of course, when you introduce the idea of the multiverse, then it was really kind of perfect. For me, when I first saw the Marvel Studios logo come up in 3 dimensions in the Apple Vision Pro, but in my living room, that was for me almost the same as the moment when I put on the DK2, Oculus DK2 back in like 2014, 2013, for the first time. I just, my mind was blown. I just was like, this is insane. I just put this on and now I have a 360-degree world around me.
We've seen that logo so many times on a movie screen. To see it now in your room in front of you was very profound. I agree.
Yeah. It was really amazing, and also just really getting that sense of depth and scale. So that was so the ability to move between mixed reality and fully virtual reality was one of the things that we really were interested in. Also, because we were essentially creating what is in effect an interactive episode of a streaming series, What If, We made some really careful choices about how much interactivity to introduce, where to introduce it, because we were really designing for an audience that we hoped loved film and television, as opposed to a gaming audience. Mm-hmm. And so we could have taken it a lot further if we had chosen to, but we wanted you to feel like you were sort of the center of that story, but that there was a real story there to be at the center of. So that definitely led to a lot of very specific choices. It was also really important to us that the cinematic quality of the visuals and sound was pretty as close as it could be to the series itself, including we did a full, they recorded the entire score in, I think it was in Vienna, with a full orchestra. And while you might not be in it and think, wow, that music's incredible, you'd be surprised how, if you then went in and sort of try to focus on the music, how impactful it is. It's really beautiful. It's a beautiful score that was done by a composer, Laura Cartman. And that reminded me, which I've known this for all these years, but honestly, sound and music can be perhaps more than 50% of an immersive experience. While it's important on linear, it's even more important in an immersive experience.
Avi, you said that in another episode, right? Like,
exactly.
You remember what was the?
Well,
yeah.
We were talking about spatial audio. So I'm hoping, I want to go back and listen to that audio again now that you said that.
Yeah.
But I'm hoping that when they recorded the orchestra, they did it ambisonically. So they really had multiple microphones that really, if you were to move around a little bit, you might hear it differently depending on where you were facing and standing. And I did notice all the characters, of course, were spatialized well. And but yeah, we were talking about how important spatial audio is, and I had the benefit when I was at Apple of working with the guy who represents the TH and THX, and so really amazing audio designer and engineer. And he's now retired, but I learned a lot from him. He would say the same thing that it's at least 50% of the experience. It's only ever 10% of the budget, but it's at least 50% of the experience. And if anybody doesn't believe me, I just challenge them and say, watch Star Wars without the music. Yeah. But the score carries so much of the emotion of that movie, especially that everybody has their own theme that comes into play and mixes really well and anticipates what's about to happen. So it's just there's no better example, I think, than a John Williams score for how that's done. Yeah. Anyway, here talking now about spatial audio, though, I think, and Helen and I were talking about this a little bit before. What's important is the cues that people don't notice, that we do because we're in the field, but we notice that the audio does come from the mouth of the character, whether it's a cartoon or a realistic person, doesn't matter. If the sound sounds like it's coming from inside of our head, it's not real, right? It has to be coming from the character for us to believe in that character and have it be real and come from the right place. Because if the sound seems like it's coming from the garbage can, we're going to think the garbage can is talking to us as opposed to the character. So it has to be correctly spatialized. But then the subtle things like the fact that the characters look at us, they make eye contact with us. And that's I want to call it a trick. It's actually an important social cue that we've known about forever. But it's the reason why a face-to-face meeting feels so much better than a Zoom call, is that we're having these social cues and making this contact. And the characters need to do this too, of course. They need to respond to us essentially like we're real, like we're there and they notice us.
Well,
go ahead.
No, keep going. There are examples that do come to mind. Sorry, keep going on.
I could go on forever on this. I don't want to monopolize, but I just wanted to point out that we notice those things in the construction of these experiences. So maybe we could ask, what other kinds of things should people notice that may be highly technical, but are designed in to give us this sense of immersion and realism? Can you think of a few more like that?
But actually, first, I want us to talk about eye contact, as I think that is really important. And it's something that I think came across through multiple projects you've worked on, Vicki. So the first one with Carne, I'm sorry if I'm saying this incorrectly, but Carne Irina.
Arena.
Yeah, and the border control guard looking,
Yeah.
making eye contact with you, looking at you. And then with Vader Immortal and Quest, Darth Vader towering over you and also looking at you. And then most recently with What If and Master Wong, and you have those moments where you're kind of locking eyes, and he even does this thing where he's like, I got my eyes on you.
Yep.
And so, I wonder if is that something that you learn from each experience and then apply to it? Because it was really interesting to then move from VR and eye contact to then having this and these moments that were kind of augmented and mixed reality.
Well, you're actually spot on in terms of the examples that I would bring up with Carne y Arena. You're right. For the vast, for most of the experience, you think you're just an observer.
Yes.
And at the very end, sorry, spoiler alert, the Border Patrol looks directly at you and says, get down on your knees. And when we watched people, either when you experienced it yourself, it is pretty shocking, but different people reacted in different ways. Some people did drop to their knees. Some people looked behind them because they assumed that they were talking to somebody else. But regardless, it was very impactful.
Mm-hmm.
And Alejandro sort of isolated that one moment to do that sort of like, oh my goodness, I've been here all the time. Whereas with Vader Immortal, when we started out with Vader Immortal, we actually were approaching it sort of like you were a ghost or an observer. And the story was unfolding around you, which is sort of a filmic way of thinking about immersive entertainment in the early days. And after a fair amount of development, we had that realization that we were not fully taking advantage of what was possible in virtual reality. It was all being done in real time. So the experience should be about you, and you had to matter. And even though, Darth Vader is an incredibly iconic character, the story really had to be your unfolding relationship with Vader. So we did a test, though, because it put a huge amount of pressure on the success of being able to establish a relationship with a character like Vader. And I think one of you said it before, that felt authentic, that felt real. And they were treating you as if you were real, and you felt as if they were real as well. So we did a test, and it's actually in the final product, but it's the one where, you're in the cell and the doors open and Vader approaches you. And it's, everything. It's the heavy footfalls, the deep breathing. And he comes up, and again, because we know where your eyes are, he looks directly at you. And when we did the test, David S. Boyer, who was working with us on the project, was executive producer. He had written some dialogue, and no one even heard the dialogue because they were so overwhelmed by the power of Vader connecting with them. So it actually taught us something about pacing as well, because to absorb that much just visual impact and material, we had to slow things down a little bit. But, that was really critical to the success of that experience. And then you're right, with What If, it was really fun because it was, for that to work, for you to be invited in and to really feel like you were critical to the story, I think you had to feel as if these characters saw you as real. And, whether it's the Watcher or Master Wong, you really did. They were looking at you throughout the experience. I've done some experiences recently, and when you do the volumetric capture, sometimes you have eye line problems, and it's amazing how distracting it is when the character's talking to you, but they're looking like over your head, and it's just very odd. And so that's one of the things, when it's entirely digital and we're tracking, then you can look directly
you can fix it,
at the character. Yeah.
No, we generally have people who can see have a superpower for being able to tell where someone else is looking. And, I can do an experiment where if I put, a colored candy on the table an inch apart, you can tell which one I'm looking at. You can say red, green, blue, just by me looking at one. That's how accurate we can be. And we can even tell if we're looking at somebody or through them. Like maybe we're not focusing and we're daydreaming, just because the eyes angles will change based on the depth of where we're looking. We don't think of ourselves as being able to perceive it, but we do perceive it. And it's a strong part of our social interaction, to be able to tell these things. And just as an aside, what kills me sometimes is that people apply technology to fix it, but overdo it. Like there's now machine learning technology that will fix your eyes gaze so that you always look at the camera, but we don't want to always look at the other person. It's an amount is the correct social amount, not 100% variable, right? Somewhere in the middle, depending on what we're saying and what we're doing. Anyway, so those things are super important. Good.
Just to sort of, so the eye contact, I think, is probably the most impactful. But some of the other things that are interesting that we learned really early on is that when you're in VR, it's like you are the camera. You are seeing what you're looking at, and so you have to help people know where you would like them to go. And so we use lighting cues, we sound, trigger action based on when somebody is looking at something versus don't have the animation launch when somebody's not looking at it. So those kinds of things we had to learn how to help direct people to the extent that you can, but they will do what they will do.
It's hard in the part of the story where people are shooting at you from all directions. It's actually hard to know that somebody's shooting at you from the side. You need to be able to, like, you're not feeling it, so you need to be able to hear it and know that something's there to turn and get them. A lot of games won't make you turn sideways because they know people are going to not even know that's happening. I'd say that's an interesting choice and sometimes a big risk, because it's like, why am I losing? I don't know. I'm getting hit from behind. That's why. One of the other qualities that can come up, it's not so much in the what if story, because we are not responsible for saying anything in this story, right? There's no voice recognition and interaction at a voice level, but maybe in the future when you make one in which we must speak as part of our agency, hearing the difference again with spatial audio, when you change the side tone, which is how our voice sounds to ourselves, to reflect the space we're in, that also has such a profound impact on how real things feel, that we know when the reverb is right or wrong based on what we see versus what we hear. And so if you see yourself in a cathedral, you need to hear yourself in a cathedral as well, and your footsteps as well as your voice. So I think that will be interesting to see when you get to the next thing and you get to play with things like that. To how you choose to use those kind of features will be interesting to watch.
We're really lucky because, of course, ILM X Lab grew out of ILM, which was the visual effects division, but we also have a group from Skywalker Sound, we call them Skylab sometimes internally, but from Skywalker Sound, who that's what they do, is spatialized audio. And it's a small team, but they are absolutely critical to the success of our projects.
Yeah, I believe it. The Tom Holman that I referred to before has worked with them a lot as well. So that brings me to the question now. So these things have been released publicly. I think, of course, there's an expectation that if you're going to release something publicly, it needs to be polished, right? Because the consumers won't understand when something is done as a sketch or animatic and not fully fleshed out, even though that might be good enough to answer some of these exploratory questions. When you want to involve the public, there's a lot more work and a lot more expense, I'm sure, in bringing these things out. But I wonder if you could tell us, without showing us, because you don't want to show us, but tell us of some other experiments you might have done that didn't need the same visual fidelity, but you learned things from, that you're able to talk about, like additional in-house kinds of experiments.
Yeah, I mean, when we started, part of the reason we called it ILM X Lab is because we were trying to capture the idea that we knew we were going to have to experiment. We were going to try things that didn't work. It was like a lab. It was not a cost center, but it was a lab. So that was very intentional. And it was also intentional that we shared our experiments in public. And so we have shared things that were much, much, much rougher. So we would do, for example, just as you said, some animatics. Like one of the things was, what would it be like if you were in a theater and, a character could come fully into the theater with you. So it was more than 3D. It was really where it would understand where you were in the theater, and it would be appropriate. So everybody was sort of seeing the same thing, but from their, from the correct angle from where they were sitting. We did some sort of imaginings about, like, what would it be like? This is actually building on the Project Porg idea. Like, what would it be like if you had a friend that was a droid, and your friends also had droids? And what would it be like if you're, in a mixed reality world and you're outside and you see your friend and you see their droid, and, the droids recognize one another, they recognize your friend, that like they become an extension of this little group of people. So we did a little really pretty rough piece, but just to kind of illustrate the idea of having a character companion, in this case a droid, in your world that could recognize not only you but your friends and their droids.
Nice. I'm curious if you've done any other experiments around the senses. I know with the Void, that was really interesting because there was some one-to-one connection, whether it was being able to reach out and touch something that visually was there and actually physically was as well. The heat, the wind. So I was in the What If Marvel experience in Vision Pro, and I was in one of the virtual elements of the fully virtual immersive environments. And at the same time, it was breakfast time and my partner was cooking. And so it was funny because there were the smells of breakfast seeping into my virtual world. So there were like fried eggs and whatever else he was making at the time. And it colored it in not a positive way, right? Now, sure. If there was something that was, related to the scene, maybe it was smoke or something, right? Then it would be enhancing presence, which is something you talk about a lot too. And so I'm curious with Vision Pro and these other virtual environments that are in the home as opposed to a location-based experience, if there's anything that you've been kind of experimenting with when it comes to the senses and maybe what that might even look like in the future.
We haven't actually done much experimentation with the senses. The one thing that we did do a little experiment about, I was really interested in if you could use, sort of breaking down the boundaries between our bodies and the experience. Yeah. So we did a little test with it's something called the Corvax cube. So in that first, the scene I was talking about in Vader Immortal, where he walks toward you and he wants you to open up that box, which you essentially do with a controller. We did an experiment where we actually used a smartwatch and said you had to try to bring your heart rate down to a certain level so that you could unlock the Corvax cube with the Force.
I love it.
And I always thought that was really powerful, and I would love to incorporate something like that into an experience one day soon. I have seen things where they're like they're peripherals, literally, that would allow you to have had smells and certain kinds of effects, but we haven't really done much experimentation there yet.
Yeah, fun. Yeah, I mean, in my book, Augmented Human, there's a chapter dedicated to each of the senses and what's possible with these new immersive environments. And just like you said, there are peripherals that you could have perhaps a pleasant scent, that followed along with the story to enhance it. But so as we are looking to the future, what else kind of excites you in this space when it comes to storytelling? What are some things that you may want to explore down the road?
I continue to be, I mean, we have really prided ourselves on trying to be on the bleeding edge all the time. So
Yes.
we have tried to do first of kind experiences and make sure that the next one that we do is really pushing the boundary in some way. I am really interested in, as I was saying earlier, this idea of creating living worlds
I love that.
where stories happen, where you are creating your own story. I mean, when I say that, it could mean many, many things, but I mean it in a not so literal way. I mean it by the experience that you have in this living world, the characters you engage with, maybe the other people you engage with, the things that you do in that world. They become a story of your experience in that world. And, to do the level of probably realism and scope and scale that I'm imagining, will require an evolution of technology as well as embracing some of the new tools and et cetera that are coming onto the market, because it's really not possible to do what I'm envisioning right now, and it's certainly cost prohibitive. But I just know it's going to be possible in the future. And the other thing I'm really interested in, this is now you're getting my personal interest, but we have over the years kind of intersected in and out with the fashion industry, and that's a whole nother story about why that makes sense. But I am really interested in this idea of augmented fashion.
Me too.
So I figured in a future, where we have glasses that we want to wear all the time, I envision, that designers will design physical garments, but they will also design digital augmentations. And like the best example, we talked about this years ago. It's like, imagine if you have a skirt that has a beautiful pattern that has, say, butterflies on it. And when you look at somebody that is wearing that skirt and your glasses on, then the butterflies come off off the dress, fly around, etc., and then reapply themselves back into the physical pattern. And what I love about that is, like, those are like mini story moments.
Yes.
They're a reflection of who you are and who you want to be in that moment. And so one of the things I've learned over the last 10 years more than ever before is story can mean so many things. It can be magical moments. It can be daily engagements like we were talking about with Project Porg, or it can be more traditional kinds of stories that you experience in a single sitting, if you will. But I love all of those.
Oh, I love that. I love how you even describe these as almost these moments as little cinematic vignettes, and it doesn't have
Yeah.
a story can be 30 seconds. It can be a second. It doesn't need to be an hour. Right. And so I love that. And also it makes me think about what you were talking about earlier about pacing and what are some kind of almost breathers that we can take in these longer form stories and have these delightful little moments. So I love what you were describing there. Yeah, that's wonderful.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful. I think we will get there in not too much time. I think that there are some real technical issues with even like, how do I know that your dress is supposed to have butterflies on it from my headset? That getting me that information is challenging. But I think we'll fairly soon live in a world in which we can share our stories, our rep in some sense with other people, and in the way that we want to. So it doesn't have to be the same for everybody. Somebody that you want to see the butterflies will see them, and somebody else you want to see as purely business person will see that as well, right? Because that's what you want for just a different aspect of your life. And I think we'll have more control over that. I think it speaks to a whole big topic we could talk about empowering consumers, right, to be able to express these things themselves, I guess,
and empowering creators.
Empowering creators, especially. I think that's
Absolutely.
that's the most important thing, is that the when we talk about back to story living, I think there's such a wide range of talents and people out there. There are people who want to be in some ways helped with the story. They want the joy of being in a good story, but they would not be the one who would sit there and pen their own narrative because that might not be where their skills are. They might have other skills that are important to share. And so figuring out how to help level up people who might be, in some aspects below average. Maybe they're below average in storytelling, but they're above average in social intelligence or some other important quality we care about. But being able to bring people up to be able to have that kind of interaction with each other, I think you're right that the tools we're just beginning to see those tools coming online, and that's exciting. Also scary for anybody who's like good at one thing. It's also scary to see those tools start to empower other people to be good at that as well. But also exciting for the things that none of us are good at to be able to be leveled up, to be able to interact at that level. And I could see that happening. It's just, there are so many, nuances that have to be worked out that we still have a lot of challenges and a lot more experiments to build on that front. So looking at the clock, I think we will get to the last question. Helen, you ready? Do you have one more to squeeze in before we do the last question?
I have one more question. And
okay.
Vicki, you had mentioned an early experience with Oculus. And what I want to ask you is if you can recall what, I guess, whether it was AR, VR, maybe it was even a magic trick or special effects, is there a transformative experience for you across any of those that you really recall as like your first almost foray into the space? Like for me, it was, I remember being a kid and seeing a magic trick of having this coloring book that appeared. Initially, the magician showed it to all the kids and it was blank. It just had the outlines and he just flipped it the other way. And then suddenly it was filled with colorful drawings, and then I had that same moment back in 2005 when I tried my first AR demo, and it was just a floating cube, but I was mesmerized by the fact that there was something in my space that wasn't actually there. And so it was kind of reigniting that wonder, that magic. And so I'm just wondering, like for you, maybe what that first early experience was that was really transformative and just kind of brought you on to, hey, the hint of like what's to come and what the possibilities might be with storytelling.
It goes back to, it was a very transformative moment for me in my career. And it was back in, it was like in the early 1990s. And I was running a small team called Lucasfilm Learning, and we were doing educational multimedia. And we were trying to create experiences that sort of sat at the intersection of, storytelling, high quality media such that you could have back then, interactivity, and then in this case with an educational lens. But it was story driven, and we created we created a number of experiences. They were all of them were prototypes, but one of them was called Paul Park Ranger and the Mystery of the Disappearing Ducks, and it was the setup was essentially that you go into Paul's cabin and, he's gone off to solve some other environmental mystery, and he needs you to figure out why there are fewer and fewer ducks coming back every year. And this is back in the point and click, era. And so it was just like sketch drawing. You go into Paul's cabin, but everything in the cabin responded in the way that you would expect it to. So if you clicked on the file drawer would come out and you could take, files out, you could play with the VCR, even had fun stuff. If you clicked on the boot would fall over and water and a fish would come out, etc. I think we were about 30 years ahead of our time, honestly. Sadly, we had to, we just couldn't make it into a business. And so we ended up shutting that team down. But it sparked in me this vision for the future. And so I watched literally, I did many things before the last 10 years, but I was always waiting for the technology to converge and for the world of film and the world of interactivity and games to come closer and closer together. And I feel like to this day, Paul Park Ranger could have been a great VR experience, because it was sort of perfectly designed to take advantage of what you can now do in VR.
Oh, that's lovely. It's delightful. Thanks for sharing that story with us.
All right. So we have, as our typical last question, it could be a hard one, but we'll give you a little time to think about it. What's a question that you haven't been asked, but you want to be asked? You think it would be important for people to know?
I think a question is what does it take to to be on the bleeding edge of innovation, like from a personal
Great question.
Standpoint? And I would say it takes several things, but it takes having a long-term vision and believing that you see a North Star. It takes an incredible amount of courage and resilience, because I can tell you, as exciting as this all sounds, and it is indeed exciting, there have been plenty of roadblocks, challenges on that journey. I mean, one of the early ones literally was Lucasfilm essentially allowing us to play in the Star Wars universe with Vader, who's probably the single most iconic character in the Star Wars universe. There was so much responsibility to deliver something that lived up to the expectations of Star Wars. That was scary. And then the last thing is that I believe you have to have passion. You have to be very passionate about what it is that you're doing, and find other people who share that passion. And that's how you succeed.
Oh,
right.
wow.
That's a good question and good answer.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for sharing 100%. Your passion with us today and your insights. You are such an inspiration. Thank you so much, Vicki. It's really been a pleasure.
Well, it was my pleasure. As I said, I followed your work, and I'm a big fan. So this was quite a treat for me. Thank you.
Thank you.